Right, so innovation strategy. We're going to focus on the firm level because this module is really about managing innovation. So what we try to do always is drag it back down to the sort of firm and sometimes even manager level, but usually the firm level, trying to understand what we can actually influence as managers. What can we actually manage? Okay? That doesn't mean that everything to do with innovation can be managed. So we need to identify the things that influence the success or failure of our innovation, even if we can't manage it. And we need to somehow have some view on how we can reduce that risk, if it's a risk, or how we can share it in some sort of way. And if you look at the evidence, there are probably one and a half things that you can't actually manage, but we know from the studies influence the success or failure of an innovation, even at the firm level. Okay, so the things we need to be aware of, but not necessarily we can influence directly. And we've come across it once before, I think, in the first session when we looked at, or briefly mentioned, things like innovation policy and so-called national innovation systems, or national systems of innovation. So we'll very briefly talk about that because, one, we know it has an effect, positive and negative. Two, we can't actually manage it, but we can take it into account, for example, where we position or locate. Okay? The second one, in theory anyway, we have some influence over. It's more challenging for newer organisations, startups. It's more challenging for companies in emerging markets because a lot of international value chains, for example, whether it be simply logistics or tariffs, are set historically. And so it's hard to break into those and to change those. Okay, so for some organisations, startups, companies from emerging economies, these are largely fixed, at least in the short to medium term. So you need to figure out how you deal with it. Okay, for other organisations, are able to influence these things still. Okay, that's why I remember 1.5. Okay, that can be sort of contextual, but they're very important. And the last two, which we're going to spend more time on, are the things that we can directly manage or influence. Okay, but I repeat, it doesn't mean we're managing everything that has an effect. So we need to be aware of our limitations in this case. Okay? And some of those are internal, what we're going to call capabilities, and some of them are more external, which you can call what you like, networks, open innovation, and we'll spend a whole session on that. Okay, and it's how the two interact. Okay. David Teese and Gary Pisano, two American sort of academics who are pretty well established in this area. I've got a sort of nice little framework here. They've only got 3 Ps, you know. John Besson and I got 4 Ps, so we win. Okay, so more Ps the better. Although maybe one of our Ps is not so good. So these are sort of different to our 4 Ps framework. Okay, they're trying to explain more about innovation strategy. And Teese and Pisano are basically saying, look, if you look at the evidence across time, and you have to look across time, and I'd argue that's another big difference between innovation strategy, today's subject, and more conventional strategic management. Is a lot of strategic management is actually quite static. A lot of the tools and techniques are scanning the environment, so they're static. What is happening now? Yeah, pest, 5 forces, what's happening now? Whereas a lot of the action, particularly in terms of innovation strategy, is what might happen next. Yeah, and with what degree of certainty. So it's more sort of longitudinal, time-based, okay? And that's where, yeah, Teese and Pisano come in terms of trying to explain dynamics over time underlined, yeah? Okay, and they identify, if you like, 3 levels. It's a hierarchical model. The highest level, slightly different term, they use the same term, different definition. Positioning, what do they mean by positioning? Slightly different to what we mean in 4Ps. By positioning, they largely mean prior decisions and prior investments. So their argument is, if you look at performance of innovation across time, yeah, you find there are consistencies. Okay, there are periodic events and shocks we'll discuss in a moment, but there are consistencies. And the argument is the reason that you get some consistency across time, often quite a long time, is because of the so-called positional decisions and investments. Things like, what technologies did you invest in 5 years ago? What plant did you build and where? Yeah? Because in the long term, you can close them down, divest, change direction. But it's in the long term. And a lot of these are quite significant costs in training, in plant, in equipment, in R&D, and they're not easy to turn around very quickly. Okay? So their argument is that creates some consistency across time, good and bad, as we saw with Kodak, over 100 years, yeah? Fuji, about 70 years, but still very different responses. So it's not necessarily, yeah, There's an infinite path there. So they're arguing, if you like, history matters. Prior decisions will influence what you can do now, both good and bad. Okay? Second one they call paths, which is more forward-looking, because what they're trying to explain is not just looking around, not a pest or a five forces. They're saying, projecting forward, if you like, what are our potential opportunities here? Given our position where we are, yeah, there's a best-selling book. Well, it used to be best-selling. I don't know what it still is. At airports, anyway, not in university bookshops. What would Google do? And the answer is, who cares? Yeah, because they're positioned at the point. It's a bit like saying, what would Amazon do? Who cares except Amazon? Yeah, because after 15 years of particular types of investment in people, technology, branding, IP, yeah, they are positioned almost uniquely. So what makes sense for them in terms of a strategy makes sense for almost nobody else. Okay? So these are really quite unique. So the idea behind paths is those past decisions and investments in people, personnel, plant, equipment, technology, IP will influence what is possible and desirable in the future. Makes sense, yeah? So, and that's both an opportunity, we can do things other people can't do, but also potentially a constraint. You might recognise an environmental opportunity, you know, doing your pest and your five forces and all that stuff, but actually you can't respond to it because you don't have what we're going to call capabilities. So the paths is more forward-looking. And the lowest level, which I don't talk about so much in their language, is how you actually execute it. So it's more like the implementation stage of our particular process model. Okay, so they have a nice hierarchical model. And the idea is it's both, if you like, opportunity creating, you can do things others can't do, but also constraining. It's more difficult for you to do certain things and others may be more able to do that. Yeah? So it constrains, but it also creates potential unique opportunities. And that's very important in terms of innovation strategy because you see these regularities across time.